In this video, we're going to learn how to create charts in Excel. Here we have a spreadsheet that shows a list of different salespeople in a company. Their age is in column C, and the amount of sales that each one has generated over the past 10 years are in the columns to the right. Let's suppose we wanted to create a simple chart that shows the individual's name and how old they are. To do this, we'll simply select both columns of data. And we generally want to include these header rows here at the top because that will give us more information that feeds into the chart that Excel creates. So to insert a chart, we go to the Insert tab on the ribbon. Here are all the different options for charts. Excel tries to recommend charts based on the data, and you can see here it's got some pretty good options for us. If we know what type of chart that we want to use, we can select that here. Now, as you hover over these, Excel will give a preview of each of those charts. In general, we should never use a three-dimensional chart unless we're showcasing a third dimension of data. So what I mean by that is, in a 3D chart, you have data that's being displayed across the x-axis, which is their name. The data on the y-axis is their age, but the depth, that third axis, that third dimension, does not actually display any information. So as a best practice, you should stay away from three-dimensional charts in Excel. We'll choose this clustered bar chart so that we can see the names going down in a list and the ages going out to the right. And when we create this chart, it attempts to give it a chart title based on the data selected here. But age is fairly vague, and so we should always make sure that the title of our chart is very specific. So here we can double click on it to edit it, and we'll just call it employee age. Down here at the bottom, I know that these are the ages that are listed out, but as a best practice again, we can go up to this chart element, choose add axis title and primary horizontal, and then here we can type in age in years. The names here on the side should also be labeled, and so to do that we'll choose the vertical label, and here we'll just name this as salesperson. Once a chart is created, we can use our cursor to move that anywhere that we might want to on the screen. We can also copy a chart by pressing Ctrl+C or right-clicking and choosing the copy option. Then we can go over to another area and can paste using Ctrl+V, or we can right-click and choose paste. Both of these charts reference the same base data here. So if a change happens here, let's change Alice to Anne, then in both of those charts, that name is updated. Sometimes if you have multiple charts on a single sheet, you may want to make sure that they're aligned. You can do this by selecting both charts, holding down the Shift or Control key, going to Shape Format here on the ribbon, choose Align, and then in this case we'll align them to the bottom of each other so that they line up nicely. Another thing we can do in addition to duplicating charts is we can actually cut them. Right-click, choose Cut, or Control-X, and then we could create a new sheet and paste that chart into that sheet. And now whenever data is updated on this worksheet, the chart on this sheet updates and reflects those changes. In fact, we can even choose the Delete key and get rid of that original chart, and our copy still remains. Let's create another chart that shows the total sales over the last 10 years for each salesperson. To do that, we'll calculate the total number of sales here, and then we'll use this formula and copy it down. Now you'll notice here it says the formula omits adjacent cells. Sometimes Excel tries to catch errors for you. In this case, we know that we didn't want to include age in that sum calculation, so we can choose to ignore the error. We'll make this column a little bit wider to accommodate the larger number. Now, just like the first chart that we created, we want to select both columns of data, but these columns are separated. So to do that, we'll select the first column, hold the Control key, and then select the second column. We'll go to our Insert tab, and then we'll look at which chart that we should choose. Now, interestingly, let's just say we wanted to do a line chart. And let's say we'd like to change the chart type. We want a line chart with the markers on it. This may seem like a good chart to choose, but it's actually not a very good one for representing this data. And the reason for that is that these salespeople are not sequential. In other words, if this were showing us sales over time by year for a single salesman, a line chart might make sense. But comparing salespeople against each other cannot be done effectively with this type of visual, because it almost looks as if they're related to each other based on the line. So what we can do is we can go up to the Change Chart Type option, and we'll use this time the column chart, and we can choose a clustered column. We'll click OK. The human eye is actually much better at being able to tell differences in sizes between columns of data or bars of data than it is between dots just plotted on a chart. Or, interestingly enough, between circles. So pie charts, for example, are often a poor choice to represent data because the human eye does not do a very good job of determining the disparate sizes of the segments of the pie. So in this case, to compare across all of the salespeople, we're going to use a column chart. We can see very quickly that Bill is at the top of our total sales. Now, just like the other chart that we made, we'll want to add some chart elements here. This is under the Chart Design tab. And we'll choose Axis Titles. We want both a horizontal title and a vertical title. In this case, these numbers actually get pretty large, up to $2 million at the top. So one of the things we can do over here in this Format menu, and if it's not there, by the way, you can right-click and choose Format Axis. And then you can choose to display units down here. So if we choose to display it in the thousands, we can see that now these numbers are represented as what is 1,000, 2,000s is a million. So in this case, we can go and put it into millions. Now, it shows just 2 and 1. It doesn't give us very much help. So what we actually need to do is we need to change the number format here, and we need to increase the number of decimal places. I'll choose 2 and hit enter. Now we can see that in terms of millions of dollars, we hit 2 million at the top, and in the middle range, about 1 million or maybe 1.2 million. So we can label this here, total sales, and then it's got a separate label here for millions that was automatically generated. And I think it's more straightforward to use the label that they already have. But I like to make that one a little bit smaller so that the eye is first drawn to this total sales here. And then of course along the bottom we have salesperson, and then the title of our chart should tell us what we should get out of it. In this case we would say total sales for the last 10 years. If we make it a little bit wider here, you'll see that the names eventually level out to be flat. Now let's say that we'd like this data to actually show the largest all the way to the left to the smallest all the way to the right. To do that, we actually won't edit the chart itself, but we'll edit the data behind it. So first we'll select all of the data that we have, and then up here under this sort and filter, you can click filter, or the shortcut key for that is Control-Shift-L. And then here we'll choose to sort largest to smallest, and automatically that updates our chart. Now let's say we want to move this chart to a new sheet just like we did previously. One of the things that we can actually do is we can say that instead of right-clicking and cutting and pasting, we could also choose this Move Chart. And it will allow you to put it as an object in one of the existing sheets, or you can actually create a new sheet, and we'll call this sheet Last 10 Years. And when we hit OK, it creates a new type of sheet. This is actually a sheet that only contains a chart. And so in this case, there's no other data or columns or rows or cells that are displayed. It's just the chart itself. Whereas here, the chart is embedded within another sheet. And you'll see that since we sorted the data on the previous sheet, this chart also rearranged the order based on not the order of age, but on sales. So Bill here is listed at the bottom, even though he had the most sales. One of the things that we can do sometimes if that happens is we want to reverse the order. And so what we can do over here on this format options, which again, if we right click and choose Format Access, that will show us, we can actually check off this box here that says Categories in Reverse Order. And in that case, it will list it in the opposite order without having to change the base data. Now that may not be something that you want to do, but I want you to know about it as an option in case it's needed. Now that we're back here, let's remove the filter. And again, we can do that here on the sort and filter, or we can press Ctrl-Shift-L again, and that removes the filter. Let's continue on by taking a look at the top 4 salespeople and what their sales were for the full 10-year period. So in other words, we want to see for each of these 4 people, what was the total line of sales by year, not just the total sales. So to do that, again, we'll select these and we'll hold the Control key down to select the years and the salesperson's name. We do not want to include their age. And we'll go to Insert. And here we have several options. Let's look at what those options are. Let's start with the column chart. If we do it this way, we have 4 columns per year, 1 per person, and there's a legend at the bottom to show us what that is. If we do a stacked column, there's now 1 column per year, but it's a cumulative or a total of each person's sales stacked on top of one another. Again, we have the legend to show the contribution of each salesperson. Then we have another 100% stacked column, this is called. And what this represents is not the dollar figure, but rather the total percentage of sales contributed by each person. So in year 1, for example, Bill contributed just over 20%. And looking at the top, Kent contributed just over 30% of the total sales. And you can see how that changes over time. Looking at another chart type, maybe the line chart, each of their sales kind of overlapping, and you can see the general trends of each line because they're different colors. We could do the same thing here with this stacked line, but we have to be careful. This is, again, just like the column chart, it's a cumulative number, meaning that it shows the total on top of each other. So Bill's line is the base with the blue line. Denise at the orange line means that she's adding her sales plus Bill's sales to get to that total number. So that would be misleading unless it was data that we wanted to show as a cumulative amount. I think the one that works the best for this is the line chart, because each line is related over time and each line denotes a distinct salesperson. So if we choose that chart here, you'll see that, for example, Denise's line, the orange line, shows hers trending upwards except for year 9, and then it returns to its trend in year 10. So you can quickly determine what the general shape of their sales performance looks like. And for example, Carl, maybe he took a few years off here and there, and that explains why he had such low sales in year 5 and year 8. This chart allows you to be able to quickly see what those are. Now, in English, we read from top to bottom and from left to right. And so if you have a legend, it's generally best to put that legend up in the top. And we can do that by right-clicking, choosing Format Legend, and it gives you the options of where to put it. You can choose to put it at the top, and then we can choose again to add in a chart title that makes sense. In this case, let's say something like Top 4 Sales People Last 10 Years. And then in this case, the x-axis is actually very self-explanatory. We don't need to add, in this particular instance, we don't need to add an additional title to explain that. But let's say instead of saying year 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., that these showed the actual calendar year. If that was the case, and it just showed the year, for example, 2000, 2001, 2002, etc., we would want to include a label underneath that explaining that those numbers are years, representing years. To get the label for our vertical axis here, our y-axis, we can choose Axis Titles, Primary Vertical, and then again, we can say Sales. And Excel automatically puts this kind of in the middle of the axis, and it tries to rearrange it if we resize the chart. But we can also move these boxes just by clicking and dragging if we wanted to put that at the top, for example. The only challenge is when we rearrange or resize the chart, it doesn't always automatically respond the same. See how it's moving down slightly here? So we just have to be aware when we change these things in the chart, some of them are responsive to the size of the chart, and if we make edits, we just have to be aware that that responsiveness goes away. Let's talk for a moment about some of the more technical aspects of charts. Once this chart has been created, Excel shows you behind the scenes here what data it's using to display in that chart. Excel has another way to show you this data, and that's in this Select Data dialog box. And here it shows you exactly what the legend entries are, and these are called series. So in this chart, we have 4 series, 1 for each salesperson. We also have the horizontal, also known as category access labels, which is right here, year 1 through 10. If, for example, we wanted to change anything about these series, we could choose to edit it, and it would allow us to pick whatever the series name is. It would also allow us to pick what the values are that will be displayed there. Let's say that we only want to do the top 3. We can click on the Kent series here and choose Remove. And when I click OK, you see that it has removed Kent's series from this chart. If we wanted to add it back, there's a number of ways we could do that. The easier way to do it is just to expand this range here, and it adds that series back in. But let's say we wanted to skip a line. Let's say we wanted to show these, and then for comparison's sake, we also wanted to include Frank at the very bottom. To do that, we would choose Select Data. We could choose Add. The series name would be Frank. And then the series values would actually be behind the chart here. So we might have to move that chart to be able to see it. But when we do that, we can click OK, and you'll see that it's now added Frank. But interestingly, the labels here, notice for the rest of them, it says year 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. For Frank, it just shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can manually edit that and choose this as the label range for Frank as well. Now, one of the other things that we talked about is what if each of these years was an actual year? So let's just do start in the year 2000, and it's formatted them as dollars for me. But I'm going to overwrite that, and we'll say year. And here, instead of 2000, what if I just use December 31st of the year 2000? It's displaying it as a dollar figure. What I can do is press Control-1 to get to the Format menu, and I can change it to a custom format. In this case, I just want it to show the year. So I can type in the capital Y 4 times, and that shows me now the year. Now I'd like to do December 31st of each consecutive year here. So to do that easily, instead of having to copy and paste this each time, what I can do is I can use the date formula. And here it asks for the year first. So I can say whatever the year is of this cell plus 1. The month is always going to be December, and the day is always going to be the 31st. And now I just need to copy that format, and you'll see it's included it. Now I'll drag it all the way over here, and we'll move the chart out of the way so that you can see there's each of those 10 years. So if I wanted to change this, instead of showing year 1, 2, 3, I could do that by going to Chart Design, Select Data, and I could edit here the labels. And I could select these years instead. And when I click OK, you'll see it's now updated that. Now, of course, we need to add a title in order to explain what that is. We'll call it calendar year. And then I'm going to move it over to the left. So that chart is now finished. And what we can do again is we'll move the chart, we'll put it in a new sheet, and we'll call this Top 4 Sales People. We'll click OK, and then we'll move that to the end. Now let's rename this one to just be Ages, and we'll rename this one to be Data. So that we don't get this year confused with anything, I'm going to add a fill color to it. We'll just do a nice light gray. Now there's another type of chart that I want to demonstrate for you. And this is a newer type of chart in terms of Excel has not offered it historically. But it's called the waterfall chart. And waterfall charts are meant to be cumulative displays of where you started and where you ended. And so what we'll do is we'll investigate Frank here at the very bottom of our list. So if we select just these numbers here, his 10 years of sales, and we choose a waterfall chart, you'll see that it's climbing up cumulatively, but over time. What we can actually do is if we add in the total amount here, it now gives us a big extra lift at the end. But we know that that's not an extra year of sales, it's just the total sales. So what we can do is we can say Format Data Series, and when we click on this one column, we can choose to set it as the total. And now that waterfall chart is going to display each of the years and then the total at the far right. So you can see that his most influential years was year 8. Now let's use our Select Data tool to edit this series. We want to give it a name. Its name is going to be Frank, and we're going to choose a category access as these years. We'll click OK, and we'll click OK again. And now you'll notice, in this case, sales are cumulative. He had no negative sales years, so nothing is a decrease. Each year is an increase, adding up to his total. So here we'll name this Frank's 10-year sales contribution. We'll again add these chart elements of a primary horizontal and a primary vertical. Here we'll call this sales. Here we'll call these calendar years. Now in this case, having the total sales value here is duplicative because we have each of these series labeled. So to save space, what we can actually do is we click on this, right click, choose Format Access, and then here we would choose where it says number by changing the format code to just a semicolon. If we add that in, it hides those dollar figures on that axis, and as a result we can actually delete these horizontal bars. And so now we know that the value is on the vertical axis is sales, but the values themselves are shown just once in each of these. The other thing a waterfall chart sometimes has is these connector lines. You can see these little gray lines here between each thing. We'll go over to this format and uncheck the Show Connector Lines option. So now each year is showing a cumulative stack on top of each other, adding up to Frank's 10 years total sales. Waterfall charts are very helpful to explain situations where you have things sometimes adding or sometimes taking away from whatever your total is. Let's move this chart to its own sheet again. We'll just choose Move Chart to a new sheet and we'll call this Waterfall. Click OK, and now that's moved over. We'll move it over to the end. Let's come back to our data set here. I want to talk briefly about some form and usage when it comes to charts. Now, I mentioned earlier that the human eye is not very good at determining the size of pieces of a pie chart. And that's true. So sometimes people will ask, hey, if we look at the top 4 salespeople and we look at their total sales, can you show me a pie chart of what their total contributions are? And there are all sorts of different ways to do this. The donut charts are coming into increasing popularity because you can put an additional data point in the center of it just by using a text box. Again, a 3-dimensional option is a bad form because you're not representing 3 dimensions of data. There's only really 1 dimension of data here, which is the sales dollars. And so we'll use this regular 2-dimensional pie chart. Now, the human eye has a very tough time telling apart the differences between, for example, this orange and gray. So anytime someone asks for a pie chart, my recommendation is to help them learn how to use a different type of chart, which in this case is the bar chart. So we'll choose this bar chart here, the regular clustered bar, and we'll click OK. Now we can very quickly see the differences in their contribution to the total. Our eye is used to being able to tell the size relative to each other of rectangles. But one thing it does is it lists these in kind of ascending order. So Kent is at the top. If we wanted to list Bill at the top, like I showed you earlier, one of the things that you can do is right click on this, choose Format Access, and check Categories in Reverse Order. Now in this case, we may not actually want to show the label here of the sales dollars. So what we can do is we can choose Label Position as None. We can get rid of these bars here. We can get rid of the legend because we know that it's total sales based on the header. And then here we can choose to add a chart element and choose data labels. And in this case, we want them in the inside base. Now there are all sorts of different design options up here. And if you hover over these, it will show you here's some kind of preset options that you could use to format your charts. Let's make sure that the colors match in terms of being able to contrast the text and the color of the bar. So in this case, we can very easily read white text inside of a blue bar. If we wanted to change that, say, to a yellow bar, that makes it harder to read the white text. So we just have to be mindful of what colors that we're using in our charts. And in this case, we're looking at the total sales for the top 4 salesmen. And I just wanted to show briefly here how it's easier for your eye to compare between the relative length of a bar versus if we were to, again, change that chart type back to a pie chart. It makes it very difficult to tell which one of these two without the number labels is actually larger. So please avoid using pie charts and instead focus on using a bar chart to compare across different sizes relative to one another. Now let's again move this chart to its own sheet, and we'll call this top 4. We'll click OK, and we'll move it all the way over to the end. The last type of chart that we're going to look at is called a scatter plot, and this type allows you to compare 2 different data sets on each axis. So for example, if we wanted to compare age and total sales to see if there were any correlation or relationship between those two, we could select the age column, hold the control key and select the sales column, and we'll go to insert, and then down here at the bottom you see this scatter chart, and we'll choose the most basic one. Now the challenge is we don't actually know which one of these dots relates to which salesperson. To add names to this, what we can do is we can select the series. We can choose up here in the top, we can choose this add chart element. There's also a shortcut here where we can choose to add data labels. And if we click on those data labels, we may want to change what it is that they show. You can show the Y value or the X value. You can choose to show a value from cells, and that's what we're going to choose, and we'll select their names. And so here you can see Bill is 54 years old and he's contributed just shy of $2 million in sales. I can also quickly move the position of these labels depending on what I'd like to do, and I can change their font size so that they fit nicely on the chart. Now, we also may notice that there's a slight upward trend in this data. One of the things that Excel allows us to do is we can insert what's called a trend line here. What is the slope or the general direction that we see? And in this case, we can see that there's a pretty positive relationship between how old you are and the amount of total sales that you've brought in, which makes sense given that the longer time that you've had to sell, the more sales you're likely to have accumulated. With that trend line, we can also display the equation of that line on the chart. And we won't go into the algebra here, but suffice it to say that the equation of this line that's on the chart, y equals mx plus b. In other words, the slope of this line. So if you were able to type in a particular example here, you could predict based on the age what their potential total sales amount would be. We're going to move this chart using the cut method, so we'll press Control X, and then we'll move it over here, Control V. We'll leave these two together on this tab. To wrap up, I just want to do a rapid fire review of a couple of other charts that are available here. Any of these, you can certainly go online and use a search engine to find videos where people have created and explained how to use all of them. There are many use cases that we won't cover in this particular video or maybe even in this particular course. But I wanted to show you a couple of additional things. One is this spark line. If, for example, I wanted to show these 10 years of data right here in this cell, I could click OK, and without having to insert a separate chart, I've now inserted a trend line that I can see exactly what's going on. If I drag that down, I can see the trend of every single salesperson lined up next to each other to see which ones are trending up and maybe which ones are not trending in such a favorable manner. Those are spark lines. Another thing that we have up here are these tree maps. Tree maps are generally meant to show what is the contribution relative to one another. So for example, if I have all of these different boxes, each box could represent a different category, and the relative size would show how much that category has brought in terms of sales or units, and it allows you to see that in a visual format. One of the other things that Excel allows you to do when it comes to charts is recently they have maps. We won't go through these in this particular class, but just know that you can also chart geographies. The final thing that I'll note when it comes to charts is there are funnel charts, there are box and whisker charts, and there are radar charts. All of these have a particular use case and value in them. Your job as an analyst or someone that uses Excel is to determine what is the appropriate visualization to use to get the message across that I'm trying to share with people. In a box and whisker chart, you may want to be able to show the variability of a given data point over time. In a radar chart, you may want to show how 5 different variables relate to one another. That's how these work, is each branch of a radar chart is a different variable. And so you can see their overlap or interplay. A funnel chart, you may want to show what is my total potential sales of the market, how much of that market am I able to reach, how much of those that I reach are able to convert to a final sale. There are all sorts of things that these visualizations are used for. So please, as you're getting ready to use Excel to create charts and visualizations, remember, most important is how quickly people can read and understand the data that's presented in a given chart. And so it's much less about the complexity of the chart and much more about how simple can you make it to get your message across.